This guy said he'd talk to me. We just need something to talk about. I don't know what we talk about, though. Biden wanted to chat, too, but I don't know what you want to talk about, so... I told him to hit the road, Jack. All right, JJ, what do you got? Wait, is JJ Canadian, or?
Hello, friends. So, as you could tell from that fancy intro, I am in Ottawa right now because I have been summoned to testify at a parliamentary committee of the House of Commons. Specifically, I have been asked to offer my thoughts on Bill C-11, the Online Streaming Act. Let me just tell you a little bit about how the Canadian parliamentary legislative process works, so you perhaps understand a bit more clearly why I'm here doing what I'm about to do. So this fancy building is, of course, the Canadian Parliament, and all Canadian laws start here in the House of Commons. So the way it works is that a member of the Prime Minister's cabinet introduces a bill to the Parliament in what is called the first reading. If the Parliament votes to proceed, that bill is then sent to a committee where it can be debated in detail by a smaller group of politicians and likely amended several times before being sent back to the full Parliament for a final up or down vote. And during the committee process, the members can solicit the expert testimony of witnesses who may have unique insights into the particular flaws or virtues of the bill. Since the government of Canada...
The worst Wikipedia defense has got to be, it's okay for a starting point, just follow the citations. If you're following Wikipedia citations, you're still using Wikipedia. It's like saying, I didn't get all my information from Brad, I also consult books Brad doesn't read. That's kind of a shitty take. However, I will say, as somebody that has done a decent amount of research on and off Wikipedia, I'm trying to think if I've ever said this in the past. This is going to bite me in the ass a little bit. It's actually kind of bullshit. This is kind of bullshit when people say, like, okay, you might not like Wikipedia, but at the very least you can follow the citations. In my personal experience, that doesn't actually usually work. Like, oftentimes the citations on Wikipedia will be like the name of a book and a page number. And there's no digital scan or anything online. Like, I can't do anything with that. Am I supposed to buy the book and verify it? And another issue sometimes that I've run into in the past, a lot of links on Wikipedia that they link to are dead links. It's not archived at all. I don't know if they've changed the standards on Wikipedia for that, but oftentimes when you click through to something, it just goes to like a default page. There's no link at all. Like, the source is essentially non-existent. So I would say that that's probably like, if I had to guess, over 50% of citations I've tried to chase down on Wikipedia are dead. So it's funny to me, people are like, oh, just click through to the links and you can do the research that way. I kind of wonder if they've ever done that before. It's like, it doesn't usually work, actually. But yeah, I don't know.
Canada does a lot of stuff these days. There are a lot of different committees, and they're all very specialized. Bill C-11 involves internet regulation, so it was sent to the Committee on Canadian Heritage, which generally discusses bills relating to the media. Now, who gets to sit on a committee, you ask? Well, they are comprised of members of Parliament in approximate proportion to their standing in the elected part of the Parliament, the House of Commons. So the Heritage Committee has 12 members, 6 Liberals, 4 Conservatives, and 2 from the other parties. The witnesses who are called to testify at a committee are also generally picked in proportion to the partisan makeup of the committee. So in this case, the Liberals got to call the most, whereas the Conservatives got to call me. So in this particular committee, there were 9 witnesses representing 7 entities, 2 executives from Bell Canada, which is Canada's largest media corporation and owns 37 TV channels, as well as one of the country's main internet service providers, 2 executives from the Canadian Media Producers Association, which is a lobby group representing the Canadian television industry, the head of the Quebec Media Association, which is pretty self-explanatory, the head of Friends of Canadian Broadcasting, which is a lobby group that mostly defends the CBC, the state-run TV network in Canada, the head of the Canadian Public Interest Advocacy Centre, which is a consumer rights group, the head of Black Screen Office, which is an organization that advocates for the interests of Black Canadians in media, and me, a mid-level Canadian YouTuber. The committee hearing began 2 hours late because for some reason it was scheduled
How do we feel about the color of his jacket and then the color of these khakis? How are we feeling about this?
Now, the one thing you have to know about Canadian media policy is that it is very politicized, and the bulk of the committee witness...
Like, I kind of agree with the passage of C-11 because, like, it makes it more consistent with conventional media law in Canada, but conventional media law in Canada sounds fucking AIDS. So, like, I agree that like if conventional media has to follow all these strange guidelines, it seems like the online media should have to as well. But those guidelines seem super fucking cringe. That's what it. I don't know. I think that's like I could see conventional media people be like, well, fuck you. You guys can make media on YouTube. You don't have to follow any of these guidelines. We've got to make fucking Canada content, Canadian approved about our fucking leafs and Indigenous people and all this shit. Why don't you have to? But like that guideline just seems cringe.
Represented traditional factions of this particular political conversation. The Bell people and the Media Producers Association represented the interests of corporate media in Canada. These people always have a lot of economic anxiety because Canada is a relatively small media market and television is a very high-cost industry. As a result, they are always looking for help from the government to keep their businesses afloat, and in exchange, government regulates them in order to have some say over what they air or what kind of programming they finance in order to serve some sort of larger patriotic greater good, which is where you get things like mandatory quotas for Canadian content on Canadian TV. The Quebec Media Guild represented the interests of the French Canadians. The French Canadians feel that their culture is uniquely important as a distinct community that only exists in Canada, and that therefore the Canadian government has a unique obligation to go out of its way to ensure that their cultural distinctiveness is preserved, including in the media. The Friends of Canadian Broadcasting basically represents the anti-American faction. As the only network that is run directly by the government, the CBC is often imagined to be the most direct bulwark of resistance to US media, and is thus very popular with the sort of people who fret a lot about the supposed Americanization of Canada. The CBC makes Canada's most overtly patriotic programming. The consumer advocacy guy, who frankly felt like a bit of an afterthought, represented the interests of ordinary Canadian media consumers, who of course the politicians all want to be seen as caring about, and the woman from the Black Advocacy Group of course represents modern political sensitivities about the importance of not having all public policy made entirely by a bunch of out-of-touch white people. And then there was me. Now, I am not naive. I understand what I represented. I was invited by the Conservative Party to embarrass the government. They knew I was critical of this bill and wanted me to poke some holes in it because it was in their partisan interest to do so. But cynicism aside, I was also a representative of new media digital creators, which, as I said, is the community that I do believe has the most to lose from Bill C-11. So after opening statements, the politicians got to ask questions of the witnesses. And again, without putting too fine of a point on it, these were all generally softballs in which the politicians asked people who they knew would agree with them, why they agreed with them in various ways.
How do we ensure that we aren't a branch plan for cultural economy, rip it and ship it based economy that Canadians benefit, but industry retains its value?
And then the Conservatives asked softballs to me that got me to harshly criticize a bill that they were already opposed to.
You know, when we hear some of this rhetoric, I do think it disturbs some people. You know, when we hear stuff about how we have to protect ourselves from foreign domination and we have to maintain our cultural sovereignty, the idea that, you know, Canadian culture is this like fragile thing that like the evil foreigners are going to corrupt and sort of erode us. You know, that to me is the kind of rhetoric you associate with like Viktor Orban's Hungary or something, right? And I don't think that a progressive democratic country like Canada wants to set the roadmap to regulating the internet that can then be adopted by the Viktor Orbans of the world. You know, because what's to prevent an authoritarian government from sort of saying like, well, we want to protect our cultural sovereignty too, and that's why we need to regulate YouTube and make sure that only good patriotic, you know, content is seen, and we'll, you know, play around with the algorithm to ensure that only the sort of patriotic content that we believe our people should see will get boosted in their feeds and their subscriber counts and all that kind of stuff. This is a real sort of old-fashioned way of thinking about Canada and thinking about Canadian culture that I personally do not have a lot of time for, and I think is increasingly just a very dated premise of thinking about culture that most YouTubers just do not conceptualize in the same way. Like, they don't think I'm making content in order to preserve some fragile idea of Canadian sovereignty. They think I'm making a cooking video, I'm making a fitness tutorial, I'm making a DIY video. You know, I make videos that are about specifically Canadian stuff, but there's tons of Canadian YouTubers who have been successful by just making the kind of content that they think there's an audience for. Sometimes that audience is Canadian, sometimes that audience is international, but you know.
It's ironic that the Canadian conservative side / JJ is not focusing on preserving culture. Okay, let me make a few really strong statements about Canadian culture that might be totally fucking wrong. And keep in mind, the types of Canadians that I've hung out with might not be representative of all the Canadians I've hung out with, but it kind of feels to me like Canadians that want to preserve conservative culture, I think they kind of idealize American conservative culture. That's like the feeling that I have. Like the Canadian quote unquote redneck is essentially an extension of like the American quote unquote redneck. They work on cars, they drive around outside in their trucks, they do off-roading, they've got guns, like that kind of stuff, like good old American stuff. And I think typically when you talk about like preserving Canadian culture, you're talking about like the weird kind of like existential threat bargain that you're making with Quebec to make sure you have enough French shit in your country so that you don't collapse under the weight of your own fucking dual citizen bullshit. And then also like your indigenous people. And then whatever weird values you try to like outflank America on the left on so that you're not just seen as an American junior. That's like broadly speaking. Now, my influence is going to be very skewed because most of my Canadian friends are probably more conservative, but that's kind of what it feels like. Like a Canadian conservative is just like they're like a distant lost orphan of like the American conservative. So preservation of culture is going to be like a left-leaning progressive thing. Like, I'm sorry, this is going to be a really ignorant question. I'm trying to think if I should ask this or just look this up. I'm going to ask this. Did Canada have chattel slavery? I actually don't know. Slavery was legal in practice in early Canada for longer than it has been abolished. Less than us, yes, under the British. Because like even, because I'm curious if in Canada, for them to have like black representation on that board, like does Canada need that? Or does Canada have like a broader problem with like, say, non-white immigrants in general, like a lot of like maybe white majority countries do? Like, do they really need like a specific, like in the United States, I understand the justification for it because of our long history with chattel slavery and African Americans and the unique culture that surrounds them and what we've done with them in our history. Does Canada need it? I have no idea. Yeah. What's up, buddy?
I'm kind of watching this video that you have on there, and I'm super confused. Maybe you can help me kind of clear things up. Does it sound like that these people are pro this bill just simply because it gives a lot back to the Canadian broadcasting company? So in other words, a pay-to-play kind of thing?
I mean, if you want to read it very negatively, you could say that, but this is my reading of this, and holy shit, I'm very, very, very not in tune with Canadian politics, but this is going to be my guess, okay? It would probably be very, very, very fucking hard to be a white English-speaking country that lives alongside the U.S. that doesn't get totally swallowed up by the U.S. So when Canada is trying to have its own cultural identity and they're trying to maintain some amount of like individual separate ideas from the United States, older people are probably thinking, well, we need to protect and we need to probably have our own broadcasting. And younger people are thinking like, oh, fuck Canada, I want to be popular in the United States. That's why all the popular, my guess is, popular Canadian YouTubes, they either move to the United States or when they're in Canada, they just talk about the United States. I'm pretty sure Lawrence Southern published more videos on the US than Canada. Steven Crowder, I think, is Canadian. Ted Cruz is Canadian, isn't he? Jordan Peterson was Canadian. Justin Bieber was Canadian, right? Like to be successful, they either talk about the United States or they come down to the United States, right? Drake is Canadian. Yeah. So there's probably an issue where Canada is like trying to, Canada probably wants to like preserve. Oh, Lauren Chen is Canadian. Yeah. Linus Tech Tips, yeah. But when you look at these YouTubers online, you don't really think of like, oh yeah, like these are strong Canadian YouTubers. A lot of people probably don't even know. They're like, oh, they're American. So my guess is the older generation probably to some extent wants to like protect or establish some sort of like Canadian identity. But obviously younger people, like we just want to make money and be famous online, you know? So I'm that's like the Steelman version of their argument, I would say. Yeah.
Isn't that kind of like a cultural anti-immigration kind
it's
of
like a cultural, yeah, it's a cultural protectionist ideology, essentially. Yeah.
Well, wouldn't the better result would be to try to make their culture as, I don't know, as eager to be digested as the American culture?
Well, but then what does that end up looking like? Then I mean, like if people are looking at them standing together, right? You're looking at the U.S. and Canada from across the sea, and now Canada's making similar stuff to America. Then essentially, you're just seeing like one giant America, right? Which essentially Canada has kind of become, right? How many movies that are like taking place in New York City and Boston and shit are actually just shot in Toronto, right? Or shot in Vancouver?
A whole lot of them, just like a whole bunch of movies are shot in Louisiana because of the tax credits.
Sure, yeah. So I'm just saying that like Canada's probably got that idea of like trying to stand out or be its own thing, but if they make their culture more easily accessible for everybody and they don't protect their own culture, they basically just get completely subsumed by U.S. cultural identity, essentially, you know?
Well, wouldn't that be the preferred thing to happen? Not
I think
for
it would
them,
be.
but for the people that would be going about a culture that people want. Shouldn't you try to make the culture or the content that you put out there what people want instead of trying to regulate it so that people can only put out certain things in your particular way whenever they're from your place?
Yeah, I mean, you could do that, but like here, this is, I'm giving very, very, very broad, very macro level takes here, so I could be wrong on the specifics of this, but my guess is going to be, if you go back to like, even in the 90s and 2000s, I remember watching like Oh Canada on Adult Swim, where Canada was making its own cartoons. They had kind of a unique cultural identity flavor. I think today, with the internet being so interconnected and interwoven and everybody being so globalized and having the inflow outflow of culture from place to place, what happens is there is no kind of distinct culture anymore. There's kind of this global world culture, but because the United States is the biggest player in that, we basically are the world culture. right? So people will kind of mistakenly say things like, oh, this is US culture, right? The United States, the American culture is the culture of the world. Well, not really. I feel like you could probably make an argument that it's actually global culture. It just tends to centralize in the US, right? A lot of our famous actors, bro, I was a kid, how many kids grew up with like their favorite American actors that were like the coolest American people? And then you find out like fucking House MD, Hugh Laurie is fucking British, right? Idris Elba, the gangster dude in The Wire, is fucking British, right? You find out that like all of these people are British, all of these people are immigrants, you know, who is our most successful fucking entrepreneur today is arguably Elon Musk. This motherfucker's South African, right? So there's like this global culture, but it tends to congregate or centralize in the United States. So it feels like if you're a country and you want to join that global culture, you're basically kind of like selling all your rights to the US in like this kind of metaphorical sense. So they probably want to fight against that. I'm not saying I agree with them fighting against it, but I understand like their motivation, you know?
I mean, eventually it's going to come down to how much can you gatekeep people saying things that are negative or not promoting your culture until the point where everybody just says, fuck you, and we'll go to a place that allows you to say and do whatever you want within the legal system.
Yeah, but that's always kind of like that's the push and pull, right? Like we're going to regulate you enough to get you to agree with us, but how much before you just push people out and they leave altogether? That's like kind of a question of taxation, right? California arguably might be dealing with that, right? New taxes. Like, okay, well, we're just going to leave. Bye. I was like, oh, fuck. You want to tax them as much as you need to provide, I don't know what they provide in Canada or in California. But if you tax too much, then people are eventually going to flee the state, right? So it's a balance they've got to figure out.
So what you're saying is Texas is about to have a massive influx of Canadians too. Son of a bitch.
Possibly. They've already got the Californians going, right?
God damn it. Fuck that bullshit.
Yeah. I'm also interested it's very interesting how separate like cities are too from rural areas. In my opinion, like I feel like the culture across a lot of US cities is pretty homogenous among like college kids. And it's funny to say that, but like if you're a college kid and you're like in San Francisco, my guess is you'll probably get along with college kids in Austin. Or like they go to UT. I think you would. Like, or at least just from very superficially when I go down there, right? These kids are tatted up. They got a lot of piercings. There's a lot of non-binary people. They got a lot of crazy haircuts. They look like, oh, I almost feel like I'm in some like gay San Francisco area. Whereas like rural people in California, like Central California especially, right? These are very conservative people. They probably get along with like conservative people in Texas. That city-rural divide is like very interesting to me. And the homogeneity of culture across U.S. cities, across state lines is also interesting to me as well. But yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, I don't know. Cool. But I feel like I think Canadian conservatives essentially idolize like U.S. conservative culture. This is what it feels like to me, at least. But like they look at the American conservative and they like dream of like you guys. That's what we want to be like. We want to have the guns. We want to continue to be out in our kind of redneck areas. We want to do all our things. But yeah.
Well, let's hope they stay with their own side of conservative, because conservatives around here are fucking retarded.
Yeah, I mean everybody is, right? I'm pretty sure Canadian conservatives follow U.S. politics more than Canadian politics. So,
yeah. All right. Well, I just saw the video. Thought I'd ask you some questions about that. I got to get back to editing videos.
Okay. Good luck. Be careful. Stay safe.
All right, buddy. Later.
Bye.
You know, Canadians, I don't know, we're a very diverse people, and we've got a lot of different interests. And I think that the great thing about YouTube and new media is that it allows Canadians to create the kind of content they want for a market that they believe exists. They sink or swim based on the popularity of that. And it's true what one of the other fellows said, which is that, you know, there are a lot of failed Canadian YouTubers. There's a lot of failed Canadian actors. Nobody is guaranteed success in the cultural realm. But I just think that YouTube is a marvelous case study of how you can be an independent Canadian content creator and achieve, you know, wealth and success and fame and all of the sorts of things that creatives want, you know, without government regulation, without subsidies, without mandates and CanCon requirements and all of this kind of stuff. So what I'm sort of saying is that I do think that we need to kind of get away from this. Like, if old media wants to still live under that regime, that's fine. But to me, as a new media creator, when I hear about talk of like protecting our culture from foreign domination and how
Flame 11 in chat really wants me to let you know that my the way that I'm summarizing the conservative person in Canada is mostly from Alberta, which is very different from Ontario or BC. I know quite a few conservative duders up in BC is where Vancouver is, right? And a few in Alberta, but I feel like the BC wilderness fucking conservative people are similar. But I could be wrong, but I don't know.
Sadly, they're not going to be making as much money, not getting enough views because governments intervened. The Liberal members.
Dustin, I think all the Canadian conservatives you come into contact with are also people who are more invested in U.S. politics. You talk about, yeah, that's probably true too. Sure.
of the committee more or less ignored me until the very
Although
end.
I do think there is a trend that U.S. politics worldwide are pretty interesting to people, right? There are a lot of British people I talk to that like didn't know that they voted for like their members of European Parliament. They had no idea when they like. But again, I guess I could still be selective for people that are more interested in U.S. politics. It's not like I'm talking to somebody who's more interested in British politics because I'm never crossing paths with them. Maybe. So yeah, I guess it depends. I don't know.
At which point, noted Liberal Member of Parliament Anthony Housefather decided
I mean, what can I say? The United States is the main character,
to discredit me on the basis that I supposedly hate the French. I found this to be a very odd and even somewhat comical interaction, but I suppose it does reveal once again what the committee's true priorities were.
And that's why I want to ask you about a couple of things that you said about bilingualism. I found an article where you called French an exotic, dying language, utterly...
Dude, I would kill myself if I was fucking Canadian. Oh my god, I would never survive in these things. Where you gotta like cuck out to this like dual language bullshit in fucking Canada to keep these Quebecian fucks happy. Oh dude, I wouldn't be able to handle it. I'd be like, yeah, French is a fucking lame ass bullshit ass fucking language. Come at me, bro. I wouldn't be able to do it. Oh god, I would feel so cucked if I was Canadian and you had to kowtow to this French cuck shit. Oh my god.
The things that you said about bilingualism. I found an article where you called French an exotic, dying language, utterly irrelevant to the ordinary lives of most Canadians. I've also found the article that you wrote saying that bilingualism is a threat to Canadian democracy. So let me ask you, as
Fucking based.
a national government, part of C-11 is protecting the French fact across Canada. And I'm asking this question to you in English, not in French, because I'm not trying to score political points on it. Can you tell me why you believe that bilingualism is a threat to Canadian democracy and whether or not you believe the federal government should not have a role to play in protecting French culture across Canada?
Madam Chair, I do not believe that this is the topic of this committee's discussion. Are not here to have...
Excuse me, I'm sorry, sir, but the committee knows exactly what its topic is. It's Bill C-11. Thank you. Please answer the question.
Oh no.
I don't really feel like it's appropriate, Madam Chair, to have a conversation about my views on bilingualism. That does not strike me as the topic of conversation this afternoon.
Do not make those decisions, sir.
Madam Chair, it's okay. I appreciate your jumping in. But I guess, Mr. McCullough, I do believe this bill is about bilingualism. I believe this bill is about ensuring that English language minority content in Quebec and French language minority content in the rest of the country is treated with respect, and that we give the opportunity for people in both languages to express themselves across this country and develop their own original programs. This committee in the last parliament...
Like, I understand the frustration if you want to preserve this. Like, I remember, like, rolling around in Sweden, like, Melina would talk about, I don't know if other Swedish people feel this way, but apparently in Sweden, you have to, like, your radio stations, I don't know if it's a requirement, maybe people just did it, would play, like, Swedish pop music, and at least she tells me, like, basically nobody in Sweden, like, it's all, like, cringe shit. Like, I don't think any young people in Sweden like it, but, like, there's, like, radio stations and Ubers and taxis and shit that will play, like, Swedish contemporary music or whatever that nobody cares about. But, I mean, like, everybody wants to preserve their shit. But I mean, like, again, there's that worldwide culture that kind of permeates everything. It's like that in Denmark, same thing in Quebec. The ABBA channel, ABBAO. I don't know.
Adopted many amendments, Mr. McCullough, to this bill.
I don't know about that. I know a lot of Swedish people that listen to Swedish music. Oh, that's what Metalloid Sword said. Well,
that dealt with this very issue, and we've had many witnesses that come talk to us about how important this is. So I guess my question is again to you, sir, about this bill. Do you believe that it is fair in C-11, which is an important part of C-11, that the federal government is protecting French content and French
wow, Qualicoa, thanks for subbing, buddy.
Original creation of content across Canada in all forms?
I do not believe that it is the role of the government to impress upon Canadians French content if they don't want it. If Canadians want to watch French YouTube videos, say, there is nothing to prevent them from discovering those videos and watching them. I do not believe it is appropriate for the government to sort of, pass laws or regulations or mandates that would, say, force YouTube to, impose French content on, YouTube or on YouTube users who don't want to watch that, right? That just to me seems kind of preposterous. I think that this should be ultimately a consumer-driven phenomenon. What consumers want to consume is what they should be free to consume. I don't think it's the role of government to tell them to watch more French videos, to tell them to watch more videos on X, Y, or Z. I don't think it has anything to do with French. It has everything to do with sort of consumer demand. And that's my perspective because I believe in a free market and I believe in a free market approach to culture. I don't believe in the idea of a government knows best approach to culture in which, politicians or bureaucrats or whatever get together and sort of say, well, you know what Canadians need to watch more of? It's this, that, and that. And we should use the strength and the power of government to, force this into their, YouTube feeds or their subscription feeds or onto their airwaves or onto the radio or whatever. That's my opinion. I know that that's, perhaps not your opinion, but that's what I believe. I believe in the freedom of consumer choice, and I believe that content should sink or swim based on its popularity.
And and I'm giving you the opportunity to express those views here at this committee, and all of Canadians can hear exactly what you think about that, which is important, and which wouldn't have happened in Viktor Orban's Hungary probably, and wouldn't have happened in a lot of the different countries that you've compared the totalitarian regimes to as you've been talking about this bill. So can I ask you, in terms of your comparison, Ms. Thomas just asked you, and you yourself brought up Hungary, you've also compared it to China and Russia. Why do you believe that this bill is about ideologically motivated censorship and thought control? Because that's essentially what you're saying.
No, I'm not saying thought control, but I mean, don't you think that there are some analogies here? Like if the Chinese established a bill like this and said that we're doing this to protect our cultural sovereignty from sort of the evil foreigners and their bad foreign ideas that will corrupt our culture, like, wouldn't you find that problematic?
I just think we're reading a different bill.
No, but don't you agree, like, in the same grounds, right? Like, don't you think that there's something... Sorry?
A second?
So again, I don't think I'm reading the same bill.
No, but I'm saying to you, like, don't you think that there's something problematic about a government that says we need to protect our cultural sovereignty? What would you think if the Chinese said that? Wouldn't you find that problematic?
Say that.
I would think that the Chinese would want to protect Chinese cultural sovereignty, but would do so in a very different way than Canada. In China, you have government that tells people what they need to think, what they need to say, and if they don't say it properly, they can be thrown in prison and they can be put all over. They could suffer terrible consequences.
What are the consequences?
That doesn't happen in Canada. It's my time.
Yes.
That doesn't happen in Canada. I'm trying to answer your question, Mr. McCullough.
Yes.
In Canada, you can come to a parliamentary committee and say whatever you want. You can say whatever you want on your YouTube channel. There's nothing in this bill, and let me be very clear about it, nothing in this bill that takes away your right to freedom of speech in this country. It is a protected right under Section 2 of the Charter, and it is absolutely protected under this bill. And thank you, Madam Chair, for the time.
Despite all of the fireworks, which did get some coverage in the Canadian press, I'm fairly confident in saying that I don't think that my testimony will make much of a difference. Bill C-11 has been controversial to a point, but I don't think it has been controversial enough with the broad general public to make the Trudeau administration start to second guess why they are doing this. The people with the most to gain from this legislation, who are also the sorts of people that the government is most likely to listen to, remain very solidly in favor. And those of us who have the most to lose from this legislation, which is to say small, independent online media creators, cannot compete with that. Now, I just want to close with a personal reflection about government. A while ago, I remember reading an essay by Heinrich Hertzberg, who's one of my favorite political writers. When he was a young man, he worked for a time at the Carter White House, and he described how that was a weirdly disillusioning experience in a way he didn't really anticipate. He said that we all tend to operate on the assumption that if you rise high enough in the government, you will eventually find the smart people who are making all of the big decisions. Not in like a conspiratorial sense, but more just in the sense that, like, at some point, you naturally expect to come across the hyper-intelligent, hyper-competent people who are actually running everything. But he said, no, that doesn't happen. Even at the most elite levels of government, it is still basically the same sort of people you come across everywhere else in life. And they are basically running things in the same sort of bumbling, half-informed way that...
This is true of every single person I find. Damn, Gina39, thanks for subscribing. That gets anywhere in politics is people always think there's like this hyper elite cabal of people that are running everything, and it's not really. Like, politicians and political people are like, they're pretty normal people most of the time, unless you're going in like private industry and you're getting really far. Like, most people are pretty normal dudes, and unfortunately they're not the conniving, scheming people you wish they were. They're usually just like kind of dumb. I mean,
most things in this world are run. A committee of parliament is, in theory, the most elite level of the Canadian lawmaking process. These are the politicians who are supposedly analyzing what our laws should say and do with the highest levels of scrutiny, informed by the advice of the most knowledgeable people in the country. Whatever it was that I experienced, it wasn't that.
wow.